Welcome back to the Sigma Evolution channel, where today we examine one of the least visible qualities behind the Quizma'S success, his unrelenting drive. Not the polished result. Not the achievement people eventually notice. Not the moment when everyone suddenly decides he is talented. We are talking about the hours before any of that, when there is no applause, no audience, and often no evidence that the work will pay off. The Quizma'S relationship with success begins with focus. When he decides that something matters, he does not merely become interested in it. He begins to organize his attention around it. He reads. He studies. He watches. He compares. He takes notes. He revisits ideas other people would have abandoned 3 pages ago. What looks excessive from the outside often feels perfectly reasonable to him because he is not studying simply to know something. He is studying until the subject begins revealing its structure. That distinction matters. Most people want the answer. The Quizma'S wants to understand why the answer works. If he is learning a profession, he studies the profession. Then he studies the people who dominate it. Then the failures. Then the history. Then the technology changing it. Then the psychology behind the people using it. One question produces another until curiosity becomes a tunnel. And he keeps walking because he suspects there is something useful on the other side. This is where his long hours begin. Not always because someone demands them, but because unfinished understanding bothers him. He may spend an evening studying something most people would skim in 20 minutes. He rewinds the explanation. Reads the paragraph twice, looks up the unfamiliar term, tests the idea against another source. Then he sits quietly and thinks about what all of it means. That final step is important. The Quizma'S does not simply consume information. He digests it. Silence becomes part of the process. There are stretches of solitude when he deliberately removes himself from noise because concentration is difficult when the mind is constantly answering knocks at the door. Notifications, conversations, entertainment, other people's opinions. Even harmless distractions can fracture attention into pieces. So he withdraws. Not because he dislikes people, but because certain ambitions require uninterrupted thought. To outsiders, this can look boring. He sees it differently. A quiet room is a laboratory. A notebook is a workbench. A long evening with one problem is not loneliness when the mind is fully occupied. And because the Quizma'S is naturally observant, he notices something many people overlook. Success is often embarrassingly repetitive. The glamorous moment may last 5 minutes. The preparation may last 5 years. That realization changes his tolerance for boredom. He understands that mastery is built through repetition long after novelty disappears. So he studies when the material stops being exciting. He practices when improvement becomes difficult to measure. He keeps refining when the difference between yesterday and today is almost invisible. This is where tenacity enters. Motivation may have introduced him to the goal, but motivation is an unreliable employee. Some mornings it arrives early. Other mornings it does not show up at all. The Quizma'S eventually learns not to depend on it. He works from commitment. Commitment is colder than motivation, but much more dependable. It says, "You decided this mattered. Continue." And so he does. The first depth of the Quizma'S drive is therefore not intensity. It is endurance. Anyone can become obsessed with something for 3 days. The real test begins when the excitement leaves the room and the work remains. That is when the Quizma'S pulls up a chair. The deeper you examine the Quizma'S ambition, the more obvious it becomes that his success is not simply a product of working hard. Plenty of people work hard. His advantage is that he thinks hard. Before he moves, he studies the terrain. He plans. He imagines outcomes. He identifies weaknesses. He asks what could go wrong, what would make the process more efficient, what skills he is missing, and what the person ahead of him understands that he does not. This creates an unusual relationship with preparation. To some people, preparation is what happens before the real work. To the Quizma'S, preparation is part of the real work. He can spend hours building a plan that saves weeks of wasted motion later. He studies systems because effort without direction is simply exhaustion wearing respectable clothes. And he is suspicious of unnecessary motion. Being busy does not impress him. Progress does. That means he is willing to sit with a problem longer than most people are comfortable sitting with one. Where others rush toward action because action feels productive, the Quizma sometimes remains still, thinking, testing, rearranging, discarding, starting again. His solitude becomes especially valuable here because solitude removes the pressure to perform certainty for other people. Alone, he can admit that an idea is weak. He can change his mind without defending yesterday's position. He can fail privately. He can experiment without explaining himself. That freedom makes him dangerous in the best sense because ego has less control over the workshop. If something does not work, he does not need to pretend that it did. He adjusts. This is one reason Quizma'S can appear unusually persistent. They are not always repeating the same effort. They are modifying the approach while preserving the objective. That is tenacity with intelligence. There is a difference between stubbornness and persistence. Stubbornness says, I will keep hitting this wall. Persistence says, the wall is still there. Find another tool. The Quizma understands the distinction. His commitment can therefore become almost surgical. He tracks details. He remembers mistakes. He studies patterns. He notices when his own habits are sabotaging the goal. He may restructure his mornings, remove distractions, change routines, sacrifice entertainment, shorten social availability, or create long blocks of uninterrupted work. From the outside, this can appear extreme. But every serious goal eventually sends an invoice. The currency may be time, convenience, comfort, ego, sleep, entertainment, or the freedom to say yes to everything. Success does not usually ask whether you are interested. It asks what you are willing to trade. The Quizma thinks carefully about that trade, and once he accepts the price, he tends to stop complaining about paying it. Still, there is an important distinction. Discipline is not self-destruction. The intelligent Quizma understands that burnout is not evidence of seriousness. A machine that never receives maintenance eventually becomes useless, no matter how powerful its engine. Rest, therefore, is not always retreat. Sometimes it is strategy. His solitude includes reflection as much as labor. He examines what is working, what is wasting time, what should be abandoned, what deserves another year. This is where his attention becomes almost ruthless. He knows that saying yes to one major ambition often means saying no to 10 smaller pleasures. And that is the part most people never photograph. No one sees the invitations declined, the nights spent learning, the mornings spent revising, the weekends consumed by a project no one understands yet, the repeated failures that never make the highlight reel. They only see the finished structure. They do not see the scaffolding. But the Quizma remembers every beam. When the goal becomes personal, eventually, something changes. The goal stops being something the Quizma wants and becomes something woven into his identity. Not in the unhealthy sense that failure would make him worthless, but in the deeper sense that the pursuit has begun changing the person doing the pursuing. The long hours have sharpened his patience. The studying has deepened his judgment. The failures have corrected his arrogance. The solitude has introduced him to himself. This is why the Quizma's commitment can become difficult for outsiders to understand. They may see someone working late and ask why he is still at it. He sees unfinished architecture. They see another book. He sees another piece of the map. They see a quiet Saturday spent alone. He sees uninterrupted territory. They see sacrifice. He sees investment. And sometimes they are both right. Because serious ambition does cost something. The Quizma simply refuses to pretend otherwise. Imagine him late at night, alone at a desk. The room is quiet. The phone has stopped moving. Everyone else seems to have gone somewhere. There is a half-finished cup beside him. Notes scattered across the desk. 20 browser tabs open. and a problem he has been wrestling with for hours. No dramatic soundtrack. No audience. No motivational speech. Just the stubborn glow of the screen and a man who has decided not to quit yet. That scene explains more about success than most victory photographs ever could. Because success is frequently decided in anonymous moments. The moment when no one would blame you for stopping. The moment when nobody would know whether you continued. The moment when the reward is still too distant to feel real. That is where the Quizma'S tenacity becomes visible. He keeps going because he has learned something important about progress. Progress rarely announces itself while it is happening. A person can study for months and still feel ignorant. Train for months and still feel weak. Build for months and still see only scaffolding. Then one day the accumulated work crosses an invisible threshold and everyone calls the result sudden. The Quizma knows better. There was nothing sudden about it. Success had been arriving quietly for years. 1 page, 1 hour, 1 revision, 1 rejected idea, 1 lonely evening at a time. This also explains why solitude becomes such a powerful part of his development. Solitude removes comparison. Without an audience, he can stop asking whether he is ahead of someone else and start asking whether he is ahead of yesterday. That changes the competition. He becomes less interested in appearing successful and more interested in becoming capable. And capability compounds. Knowledge connects to knowledge. Skill strengthens skill. Discipline begins feeding confidence because confidence built from repeated evidence is harder to shake. Eventually, the Quizma walks into rooms with a calm that people mistake for natural talent. They did not see the preparation. That is why it looks natural. They meet the finished sentence. They never saw the drafts. And perhaps that is the deepest truth about the Quizma's drive. His greatest advantage is not that he wants success more than everyone else. Wanting is common. Dreaming is crowded. He simply develops an unusual willingness to remain with the work after everyone else has become bored with watching. He stays through confusion, through repetition, through slow progress, through solitude, through the uncomfortable period when effort has not yet produced evidence. And over time, that persistence creates something more valuable than motivation. It creates inevitability. Not because success is guaranteed. Nothing worthwhile is. But because every hour spent studying, planning, refining, thinking, failing, correcting, and returning makes him more prepared for the moment opportunity finally appears. So when people eventually ask how the Quizma became successful, they may search for the breakthrough, the connection, the lucky decision, or the perfect moment. He knows the answer is less glamorous. It happened during the hours nobody noticed, the nights nobody applauded, the mornings when quitting would have been easier, the stretches of solitude when nothing seemed to be happening. The world eventually sees the achievement. The Quizma remembers the excavation. Because by the time success finally knocks on his door, it often discovers something unexpected. He is no longer waiting for it. He has been building the house. For more Sigma evolution insights, psychology, and strategies, please like, subscribe and comment your thoughts. And hit that notification bell to keep up with each episode of the Sigma Evolution channel.